class, we just have a little bit of lecture. This is the last 4 to 5 slides of last week's PowerPoint, the one that covers biodiversity and human population growth. Now, last class we ended around here talking about the total fertility rate. This is a measurement of how quickly a population is growing. Remember, the TFR is the average number of children a woman has. You can look at it on a country by country scale, or what we see on this slide is looking at the world TFR. So the trend we saw is that, back in the 1950s, it was around 5, so 5 children per woman, which is a lot. And that's really scary. I mean, that's when we had such huge population growth. But, around today, it's about 2.6, which is good, nearly half of that. So this is one of the lines of evidence we know that the human population is probably experiencing logistic growth. We just haven't gotten to that leveling out part yet because our growth is slowing. We're having less children per woman. Now, I ended with this idea that, remember, 2.1 is our optimal TFR, at least to have zero population growth. Now, although 2.1 and 2.6 don't seem that different, it actually makes huge changes when it comes to our total population down the road. Now, the last topic that I wanted to introduce, still talking about human population, is how can we look at the demographics of a population? Demographics really just means kind of like an age breakdown, a gender breakdown, just to understand what a population looks more. Not only are we looking at the number of children that women are having, but also looking at, do we have more males and females? That has implications for reproduction. Where are most of the population? That has a really important information regarding society and economics of that society. So this tool is called a population pyramid, given its name mainly because of the way it looks, but it's plotting out the population, usually country by country. You have population pyramids on a country scale. This one, for instance, is China. So let's kind of point out some basics of it. It shows you genders. So in this case, we have male on the left-hand side, females on the right-hand side. But instead of just giving us a TFR, it tells us how many individuals are in different age classes. For instance, this very bottommost bar, these are all of the individuals aged between 0 and 4. The next bar is between 5 and 9, 10 to 14, so on and so forth, until you get to 100 and higher. So this gives us a better idea of what our population looks like. Now I'm going to come back to this slide. I'm going to go to the next one first, but then I'm going to come back and we're going to take a look at China. So there's 3 different general shapes of population pyramids depending on the growth that's happening within that country. So here I have an example of Kenya. Remember that TFR was highest in the Central African countries, such as Kenya. And these areas had multiple children per woman. And you can see that in this population pyramid. Here's our reproductive age in the 20 to 40 range. But you notice that the children age, the 0 to 20 range, is huge. That tells us, okay, women are having a lot of children, and you can see that in this diagram. So by looking at this, we have an idea of this is a rapidly growing country because all of those children will then have, 5 to 6 children who will then have 5 to 6 children. And this can be problematic if you're the government of this country, and countries' governments use these tools a lot. If you're a government, you look at this and you get worried because you have to feed all of those people. You have to get water, shelter, protection. Now, some countries are more involved in that than others. That's really a country by country basis, but still, these are considerations you have to take given the shape of this pyramid. So that's rapid growth, not just Kenya, but a lot of countries around the world. You have other countries like the United States that exhibit slow growth. So thinking about, if you look at this, the number of children we have is around 2. We're about the same, that replacement level or that 0 population growth. You can see trends, females are living longer than males. You can kind of see the baby boomer influx, so a large number of individuals. Yes, we do have slightly more children, but barely. So that tells us, okay, we must have very slow growth. This is great for our economy in the sense that we can make predictions. Okay, in 100 years, we're going to have around the same number of people we need to feed, so we can start addressing that problem now. Whereas in Kenya, I mean, you're talking about adding, so many hundreds of thousands and millions of people to their population every year based on how many children the females are having. Now, the very last type of growth is negative growth or zero growth, but we'll focus more on negative or declining population. This is an example of Italy. Japan is another classic example. Really, a lot of the European Union nations have zero or declining growth. And what you notice here is that the children age is actually smaller than the adult age, so to speak. And that's kind of scary, just because what that tells us, and when I say scary, I mean scary in the sense of governments and in the sense of society in that country, is that what you mean is you are going to have a whole bunch of jobs and no one to fill them. Think about entry-level positions. Those are typically filled by teenagers, by people getting right out of school, but you now have far less of those people. You also have, on the opposite spectrum, you have what is called an aging population, where you have more elderly than you do have people to take care of them. Not just thinking about nursing homes, but also taxes. A lot of countries have programs similar to Social Security, that part of your taxes go into a fund that's used for people who, when they retire, they can draw from that fund. Well, if you have less people working because there's just less people, you have less people putting into that Social Security fund. However, you have an aging population, so there's more and more older people who are trying to draw from that fund. So on an economics level, that's really detrimental to that country. There is now, on an environmental standpoint and a resource standpoint, this is great. Some people think we have too many humans on Earth as it is, so this is a good trend. And it is in that argument, but again, thinking about that society, you're going to see potential crashes in their economy due to this influx of older people and not having many young people replacing them. In Japan, they're actually loosening up their immigration policies just so that they can get more people in to fill jobs. Now, I won't show this video right now, but I do recommend watching this video. It's a short news article in Japan talking about their aging population and kind of the root of why people aren't reproducing. Why aren't they having sex and having babies? A lot of these countries, in particular Japan, are offering free healthcare to women who want to have children, free nursery care, free diapers, free everything, just to influence people to have children. Because again, the government sees this and says, okay, we're going to have a lot of problems if we can't increase our population, at least at that age group. Now let me jump back to China. This was on the previous slide. So if you look at this 40 to 44 range and up, that's like a beautiful pyramid. It looks a lot like Kenya, where you have this really rapid population growth. And the government of China saw this and really looked at it and was like, oh my God, what am I going to do about this? This means we have a lot of people we need to feed. We have a lot of people that need homes, that need fresh water. How do we handle that? And the government of China, they are people-minded in the sense that, they want to be able to provide for all of their citizens. Whether they accomplish that or not, it's a topic for another class, but that's how they see it. We have a rapidly increasing population. How do we address it? So you may be familiar with China's one-child policy. And in that one-child policy, as the name suggests, they told families, particularly urban families, that you can only have one kid. And if you do, we'll give you tons of benefits. We'll give you raises at work. You'll have better opportunities for housing. You'll get this, you'll get that. And so parents were like, yeah, we'll have just one child so that we can get all of these economic perks. And if you look at this population pyramid, it worked. You can tell when this policy came into effect. So it was about 40 years ago in the 70s. Here's that really last generation before that one-child policy came into effect. And you can see it really stabilized their population growth. They just passed laws now to make it a two-child policy, so reaching that zero population growth. Now, there's been a lot of cynicism and a lot of negative comments towards China's one-child policy, saying it's overstepping its bounds. You can't control if people want to have kids or not. And you can argue morally or ethically either way, but thinking about it on a resource use, this was a fantastic idea. You controlled that. Really, it was an exponential growth in China, and you were able to control that to prevent a crash, to prevent, widespread famine. So on a resource standpoint, this was a very effective policy. And the major point is, again, looking at this population pyramid, you can see the effects of not just the one-child policy, but in the United States, this baby boomer generation. This has obviously moved since then. They're now older, in their 50s and 60s, but these images are a little bit older as well. So you can see changes in demographics using population pyramids. So really great tools. One last slide that I wanted to show you was looking at growth in the long run. We see these population pyramids as static, like, oh, this is what it is right here, right now. Here's two different population pyramids. One that's exhibiting slow, maybe even declining growth in the European Union. Another one showing North Africa and West Asia, so areas that had fairly high population growth. And if you look at their pyramids, what we can do is make inferences is if everything stays constant, everything stays the same as far as their population growth, here's what those populations look like in 100 years. So the European Union, you see their population about the same, slightly older population. You see this larger population in the older ages and kind of declining in these younger ages. But what's scary is if you look at countries that have this really high total fertility rate, that have a lot more children than you do parents. I mean, look at this huge population, incredibly huge. Now, someone made a note, and it's a really fair note. We don't really see this in Central Africa, even though they have such high TFRs. Because when we watch that population video, remember, back in the day, when I say back in the day, I mean hundreds of years ago, you had a lot of births, but you had a lot of deaths. And we kind of addressed those deaths with food, with healthcare. But some countries, like those in Central Africa, lack those. They don't really have a strong healthcare system. They don't have very much food. So yes, in theory, their population would explode to that you see down here in the lower right corner, but they still have a very high percentage of death, which is kind of what has been keeping their population from reaching this explosive growth. Now, China does have more healthcare, does have more food, does have a bigger economy, which is why when those government officials saw this population pyramid with a really high percentage of children, they knew it would be problematic because they live for a very long period of time and they were more likely to exhibit growth like you see here. And that's why they implemented that policy. So just kind of to round this all out, we already saw this slide, the one that what threatens biodiversity, and a lot of it is us. Yes, there's natural things happening that affect biodiversity, but this day and age, the biggest threat is humans. So we just talked about population growth, and we're going to link this in the resource use next week. But just keep in mind that all of these things that are on here, although tied to humans, it's really directly tied to how many humans there are. This wasn't really a problem 300-400 years ago because there just really wasn't many of us around. So just keep that in mind, make those links between human population growth and how many humans exist versus the problems that we're causing to biodiversity. So that's it for this week's lecture, and I'll see you guys in class on Tuesday.